Designation for the record.
I'm Warren Smith. I'm president of the Caribbean Development Bank.
Okay, Mr. Smith, could you highlight the significance of this meeting today and point out some of the main things which came out of it?
Well, first of all, let me say a very big thank you to Prime Minister for inviting us here, especially so early in his tenure. The meeting today was an opportunity for us to, first of all, look at the relationship between the bank and SaintLucia, to examine some of the projects that we have here, projects that are ongoing and also projects that are in the pipeline, and also to look at possible other opportunities down the road. That was one of the principal discussion points during the meeting today. The other discussion centered around the desire of the Prime Minister to do an examination of the state of play here in SaintLucia, to do a diagnostic, as he put it, to examine the country's circumstances from a fiscal point of view, the debt position, and also the possibilities for growth. So we talked about how the CDB might be able to assist along with some of the other development partners and an entity like the East Caribbean Central Bank, all of whom are very close partners of the Caribbean Development Bank, as they are of SaintLucia. So that the objective is to get to have a better understanding of the Prime Minister and his government's objectives for this country. Their objectives in relation to improving economic circumstances and helping to drive greater prosperity amongst the people of this country. Those objectives coincide very closely with the mission of the Caribbean Development Bank and our focus at this particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. You highlighted about possibilities and prospects for projects with the government of SaintLucia. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Well, maybe I should just say that a lot of our emphasis recently has been in the water sector, which is vital for the main industrial and other activities in this country. SaintLucia's primary industry, as everyone knows, is tourism. Tourism requires water and reliability of water supply. But water, they say, is life, and it is very important for the enjoyment of a good lifestyle to be able to have reliable access to water. So that one of the areas that we have been emphasizing here in SaintLucia is to enable the country not only to harness what it currently has, but to look at possibilities for improving water supply in areas that are not currently well developed. The Prime Minister shared with us some information about possible growth areas and in other parts of the country, on the less developed parts of the country, and naturally he wants to ensure that the proper infrastructure, including water, are in place. So that this is one area that we'd like to collaborate with him on.
Any other prospects in other areas the government intends to act upon?
Well, one area that we felt that we could be of assistance to Prime Minister Chastain's government is in the area of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Just at our last board meeting in Montego Bay, we approved a street lighting project. This involves the replacement of existing street light bulbs with LED bulbs, which are way more efficient and will enable the government to save substantially on its public lighting bill, street lighting bill. So that project we're very excited about because we think it will not only benefit the government from a fiscal point of view, but it will also help to reduce the amount of imported fossil fuels that Lucia will require, which benefits the balance of payments here. That is one area. We also mentioned to the Prime Minister that we are interested in helping his government to understand better the geothermal prospect in this country. We believe that St. Lucia has very, very good possibilities in that area, not only to secure energy security, meaning developing greater independence from imported fossil fuels, but also, if developed in a particular manner, could put St. Lucia in a position where it could become an energy exporter. So that's another headline project that is a possibility. It's still in the very early stages, and it really would be up to the government of St. Lucia to determine whether that is an option that they would like to pursue. But we had a good discussion with the Prime Minister around that.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, well, a number of important projects were highlighted. It seems very exciting. Any eminence to some of what he pointed out?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Smith and his team for responding on short notice. It was actually, in fact, when I became Prime Minister, it was one of the first phone calls I received, and we were able to chart a way forward. So today was a significant meeting, and included in the meeting was the Minister Eubalus Raymond, who is the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, and also Mr. Guy Joseph from Economic Development and his team. So we're looking at, first of all, the overall projects that were currently underway, new projects that have already been approved or in the process of being approved, and then more importantly, where we see ourselves going down the road. The most important part for me is that CDB is going to be taking the lead role with regards to the ECCB, the IMF, the World Bank, in terms of coming in and reviewing where we are. So I think that the term that's probably used that I like a lot is a homegrown solution. So let us not wait for other people to come and tell us that we have a problem. Let us recognize that we do have an imbalance, because you cannot continue to operate a deficit budget. The vast majority that we've been borrowing over the last 5 years has been to pay for the deficit budget. And when you continue to run a deficit budget, basically what you're doing is running away from some of the structural problems that you have in your own economy. So there's some very clear things that we believe, and we've talked about them, in terms of reprioritizing where our expenditure is, making sure that we're spending more money on things that are going to actually build capacity, and also allow the economy to be able to grow. So I was very, very heartened by their willingness and how fast we're going to be moving to make that happen. Once we've analyzed the situation, so for instance, we have a lot of debt currently that's being financed with treasury bills. And that's a very precarious situation to be in. One, it's expensive. Two, you're constantly having to roll over those funds. And three, you really can't get into any long-term kind of planning when you're restricted in that area. So I'm hoping that we can find a solution to that problem. I know the bank has had ways of being involved in terms of solving that by converting some of our short-term debt into longer-term debt. But that's going to need an agreement on a strategy on the way forward, because what you don't want to do is to make that investment, but you continue the same bad habits. Okay, so we have to make sure that we know exactly where we are, what changes we're going to make sure that those changes are going to work. So we're going to agree on benchmarks moving forward, and we're going to be doing this on a voluntary basis. Obviously, we've come in with some very different ideas in terms of how to be able to move forward. One is with regards to VAT. There is an entity in the region that has expertise in that, and we're going to be getting them to help review the work that we've already commenced from the VAT office and the Ministry of Finance here in SaintLucia. We also want to be able to look at the economic zones that we've spoken about, and in terms of how do we create an environment to facilitate growth. So I think that Rodney Bay and Gros Lake are underperforming. Absolutely think that Castries is underperforming. I mean, it closes at 4:30. Walk around Castries and you see how much land is unproductive, is not generating any jobs. As successful as people think that SUFER is underperforming, because there are a lot of assets that could be used even to a greater extent. And for sure, I don't think there's any argument that Viewfort is underperforming. So the goal of my administration is to be able to improve the competitiveness and the productivity of those 4 areas. And in doing that, it's going to generate jobs. And in generating jobs, it's also going to be earning more foreign exchange and allowing our country to be able to grow. So it is a 2-pronged approach. One is, how do we get better fiscal management of the tax revenue we presently have? And then number 2, how do we bring foreign direct investment in this country and allow the country to be able to grow? And then there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's the banking industry. There is our commerce industry. There is our manufacturing industry. And then you have your social industries, which is education, and your healthcare, which are also, and security, which are under tremendous pressure, as well as housing. So there's a lot to do. If you try to put too many of those things in one basket, it becomes impossible. So we're going to have to determine the priorities, and that's what the purpose of that diagnosis is. Where can we make that, if we have limited resources, where should we invest that money in initially? Where should we invest our limited human resources, meaning there's only so many civil servants that we have, so there's only so many hours a day that we can apply to the problems. How do we prioritize? And that's where we're going to be seeking the assistance of CDB, the World Bank, and the IMF to make sure that we agree in terms of where those priorities are. And if there's a shortfall, hopefully those institutions will help us in meeting those shortfalls. So a big one really is the dam. It's a priority. I mean, it's taking too long for us to desilt the dam. And everybody recognizes that has to be resolved as quickly as possible. So we are going to be moving expeditiously to do that. The new hospital is going to have a huge burden on the recurrent expenditure of this country. We're still not happy with the quality of healthcare, so we believe that introducing healthcare insurance. And again, I'm sure that that's one of the things that's going to come out on the list, and we'll agree in terms of how we should be proceeding to be able to introduce that. So this is a very important day for us as a new government, and it is about the partnerships that already exist, and to gain confidence in the policies of the government is to allow them to be scrutinized. There's nothing to hide. I mean, here are what our ideas are. Here's what the numbers are saying. If somebody has a better way to be able to make it work, then we're interested in listening to those. But what we're not going to do is procrastinate. What we're doing now is not working, and we need to be able to move forward.
You highlighted the need to bring in more foreign direct investment, and one of the ways the previous government intended to do that is through the CIP program. What is the government's position on that initiative? Do they intend to reposition it? What is the UWP administration's?
Well, CIP is just another source of funding. And as I had indicated in opposition, even before the government had introduced the CIP program, I said we're already part of a CIP program. Because St. Kitts, Dominica, Grenada, Antigua all had CIP programs, and those citizens, those new citizens, had access to our market. So in fact, a lot of the investment in restaurants that came from foreigners were people who invested in a citizenship program in Dominica, and because of the Dominican passport were allowed to come to SaintLucia. So the issue as to whether we should have a CIP program or not, for me, is a moot point. Once you have it now, how do you make it work efficiently? And it's to direct it in the areas that you want. So one of the things that we're not comfortable with the current program is that where the monies can be used is not legislated. So I would like the fund to be like a sovereign fund. I'd like to know that the monies are going into capital investment or into debt reduction. But a very limited amount of money goes into recurrent expenditure, if any at all. We also are going through right now how many projects we should have approved, because there is a limited number of people applying for citizenship by investments programs in the Caribbean. So if you have too many approved projects, it'll dilute the ability of some of those projects getting off the ground. But we are in the process of appointing a new board. The board was put to cabinet this last Monday. Next week it'll be ratified, and as soon as that new board is in place, we'll be working aggressively with them to be able to restructure some of the things that we've spoken about.
Any other points you would like to highlight in terms of bringing in more foreign direct investment into St. Lucia, what initiatives, other initiatives?
The big one, and we didn't have a chance to talk about it today at the meeting, but it's something that's obviously going to be a topic of discussion, is incentives. Incentives have been a very controversial discussion because you're seeing now such a variety of types. So there used to be a time where I would say in the Caribbean there was a very harmonized incentive program. There was very few differences between one country and another. We're now seeing very radical differences. Grenada and Barbados and Antigua have departed what has been the norm. And so therefore, and St. Lucia, the former government just introduced a new incentive regime, which we had concerns with. So we are going to be reviewing our incentives. I'm hoping that we can solicit the technical assistance of the CDB in reviewing some of the things that we're going to be proposing. But we have to make our tourism sector more competitive, but we have to also be assured that we're getting a fair return on the investments that are being made, because we are making those concessions available. So that is a critical area that we're going to be working on very quickly, because the majority of foreign direct investment is going to come from the tourism sector. I'm very excited about the banana situation. We are awaiting the confirmation of the final meeting, which will be in Paris, to meet with the agency that's responsible for marketing the bananas. And I still think that there's a great opportunity right now to be able to increase banana production quite considerably, up to as much as 60,000 tons. So we know how important that would be to the rural areas and to our farmers, and I know that the Minister of Agriculture, with my support, we're really working aggressively to make that happen.
Finally, when the eventual examination on the country's economic status comes about, how concerned are you that the reflection will not necessarily be favorable?
I think that when I looked at the macro accounts, the ones that were made first, we just had the social and economic review, and obviously now being in government and getting some of the numbers and confirming some of those numbers, we have a problem. This government cannot continue down the road. It's just not sustainable under the current policies and trajectory that we have. So there has to be a change. We are spending more money. Well, the cost of running the country is greater than the revenue that we're generating. So unfortunately, an austerity program would be that you would cut your expenditures to meet your revenue. Now, if we were to do that, it would be pretty draconian. So our strategy is to make sure that we reallocate where we're spending money, to make sure that we're improving the capacity and the competitiveness of the country, and that we focus heavily on getting the foreign direct investment, and we grow our economy. And that is why we've strongly believed that there needs to be a reduction in VAT, because we think that the country's overtaxed, and as a result of it, consumption has been constrained. So without consumption, small businesses can't survive. If small businesses aren't surviving and even big businesses are contracting, it has an impact on your banking sector, which we've seen. Non-performing loans are at an all-time high in this country. So those are the things that we believe that the current situation is. The question becomes, how do you resolve them without causing social distress? But the fact is that this is not sustainable, and if we don't fix it, the social problems in this country will be exasperated. It will be a disaster. When you're talking about we've been borrowing $200 million a year, and that the reserves that we had for paying off the bonds has been spent, and that almost 50 or 60% of the money you're borrowing is in short-term instruments, that's a recipe for disaster. But the fact is that we're going to try to address it now. We're not going to try to address it alone. There's some very difficult decisions we're going to have to make, but we're also mindful that the unemployed, the pensioners, and people who've been living below the poverty line have been carrying a huge burden by themselves. And so that any policies that we adopt moving forward has to address their needs and must take into consideration their own living standards. So that is why I'm very grateful to have the assistance of the CDB and everybody else. And it's our job to make sure that we be the voice for those people and think creatively out of the box to make sure that we can address these concerns moving forward.
You indicated that, indicated that difficult decisions have to be made, and one can argue that austerity measures is a reality eventually. What is your position on that? Is that totally off the table?
Difficult decisions and austerity are two very different things. Mm-hmm. Austerity is when you've gotten to the point where you're given no choice. And austerity generally means that you've got to live with the reality. In the short term, you're not going to be able to increase the amount of money that you're generating, and the only way you can stop the bleeding is to cut cost. So tough decisions are where you want to reallocate resources to. So it means that some programs will go away, and that you're going to spend more money in other programs. Those are some of the tough decisions. So the fact is that there isn't enough money to do all the things that we want to be able to do. So somebody has to make that call. And right now, if in fact you're not seeing growth, the emphasis has to be in spending money in growth areas. So let's take a classic example. The government approved, or the government borrowed $65 million to do a office complex in View Fort, 75,000 square feet. That's a tough call. The project is already underway. As a government, I can say to you that we feel that that's the wrong way to spend the money. Because even after the project is completed, the staff to go in there are going to increase recurrent expenditure. It's not going to be a project that's going to generate additional revenue. So we're looking at transferring that loan once the new board is in place, to meet with the board, convince them, stop that project, use the funds now to do a subdivision of a land in Ansap, where we put in water, electricity, and sewage, open up lands for development, and get now good incentives to get solutions to be, so they can build restaurants, they can build hotels, they can build shops, they can build residential facilities in 44 acres across the street from the Ansap beach. That way now, you're growing the capacity of your country, and you're now getting tourists to be able to come in, and you're creating more economic activity. That economic activity is not being driven or being paid for by taxpayers. You're building the capacity, and that is coming from foreigners coming into SaintLucia. So those are some of the tough decisions that we have to be able to make right now. In healthcare, okay, we have to get to a healthcare insurance program, because government does not have the capacity to continue to be self-insurance. So we're spending $110 million a year. Estimates are that recurrent expenditure on one hospital alone is going to increase by $50 million. If you can go to a healthcare insurance program, and it means now that when solutions go to the hospital, the insurance is paying for those bills. But it's going to require solutions to be able to make a contribution to that healthcare insurance. So people who are working, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, will be obligatory for them to have insurance. Part of their salary will be going to pay for that premium. What we're trying to do is to increase the numbers of people participating in that insurance program, so the premium can come down, and maybe even the amount of services that are covered under that insurance program is increased. But that's a reality, because continuing going the way that we're going right now, it's not going to work. We can see what the quality of the healthcare is. So those are some of the tough decisions, but that's not austerity. Austerity will be if we don't listen to this and we continue fooling ourselves, we continue running deficits. There'll get a point where people are not going to buy our treasury bills, okay? And the only persons you can turn to as a country at that point, when there's that cash shortage, is the IMF. And I can go to the IMF.com or .org And I can show you what a structural adjustment program looks like, and it's not pretty.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.